Hello, everyone. My name is Traci Dant. I'm a poet and fiction writer, and thank you, Dr. Nam, for inviting me to present some of my work today. I want to start off by telling you a little bit about my project. My novel in progress is called Polio Summer. The main character is Bobby. She's 11, living in St. Louis with her father, pregnant mother, little sister, and grandmother. The novel is a fictionalized account of my mother's battle with polio. She contracted the virus when my grandfather refused to allow her and her sister to be vaccinated. My mother had a really bad case of polio. She was in a coma for several weeks and nearly died. I've heard this story all my life, but as an adult living through my own pandemic, I started to process all of these details in a different way, and I started to wonder more deeply about the historic and socioeconomic factors that had impacted her health care and her family's decision not to vaccinate their children. Here are some of those factors. My mom got polio a year after a vaccine was widely available. My grandfather was a migrant from Mississippi. He was fleeing the rural South for better job opportunities up north. My grandfather was a janitor, and my grandmother didn't work. So even up north, there was never really enough money to support the family. My mother's family lived in segregated North St. Louis. It was one of the most segregated urban areas of America back in the 50s, and it's still very segregated today. My mom's family also lived in public housing. Their home, Pruitt-Igoe, became one of the biggest housing disasters of the 20th century. The city and the federal government would raze it to the ground about 20 years after it was built. My mother's family relied on public hospitals for their health care. When they went to the hospital, they rode the bus because my grandmother had no access to a car. My grandfather had less than an 8th grade education, and my grandmother read with a good bit of trouble. Both of them had received the kind of education that was interrupted to stop and pick cotton. My mother's family was also very patriarchal in structure. My grandfather would have had the final say in all of their decisions. My mother contracted polio in part because of a misdiagnosis. If my aunt had been properly diagnosed, she may have been quarantined and my mother would not have gotten sick at all. And the hospital where my mother received treatment was one of the only hospitals in the country that trained Black residents. Black doctors could not do their residencies in the South, so it is likely that almost every doctor and nurse that she encountered was Black. And although it was a public hospital, the facility was looked upon with great pride in St. Louis. Understanding all of these factors allowed me to see the story from a broader, more empathetic perspective. This is likely similar to the process that you all must go through when listening to your patients. So now I've given you some context. I'm going to read a brief excerpt from the book and then turn the floor back over to Dr. Anam. The polio bus. That summer, my sister Marlene and I didn't agree on much. We agreed cabbage boiled or fried was nasty. We agreed grandma was mean. And we agreed that Daddy would do almost anything if we asked him right. So when the polio bus parked in front of our building with a sign that said, "Get your shots here today," Marlene had an idea. "I'm going to ask Daddy not to give me no shots," she stuttered. So Marlene threw a fit. She cried like she was 6, not 9. And since she hardly ever cried, her tears soaked right into Daddy's squishy heart. So just like that, Daddy rescued us from the polio bus. It didn't matter that Mama said, "Truman, they need those shots." Didn't matter that there were still kids on the news with shrunken legs and arms using braces or in wheelchairs. Once Daddy made a decision, his mind stayed in that spot. His mind was heavy like an elephant I saw at the zoo, slow to move and hard to turn around. The stink. My name is Bobby, and I like my name fine unless Marlene is calling me. She said it was like I was a lost cat she was trying to find. That summer, I was 11 and Marlene was exactly 16 months younger. But she always acted like she was 16 months older, and that got on my nerves. We lived in a tall apartment building in St. Louis, North St. Louis, Black St. Louis. We could go days and never see anybody white except on TV. I lived with Mama, Daddy, Marlene, and Grandma. That was a lot of us in our apartment, and Mama's belly was big with the next one of us, probably another girl. Would be nice not to have so many girls around all the time. Me and Marlene were always fighting, and Mama and Grandma didn't get along either. Grandma came to visit when Mama had me. Mama said she just never left. Mama had been mad about the never leaving for so long that the mad turned into something more than a feeling. It was like a stink, the kind of stink you find inside a forgotten pot of food. The stink floated out every time they talked to each other. Mama hated the way Grandma made up the bed lumpy. She hated the way Grandma chewed tobacco and spit it in a coffee can. And she really hated the way Grandma called Marlene Blackie because she was dark-skinned like Mama. When Daddy and Mama fought about Grandma, the fight always ended with, "All right now, Ida." That was Daddy's way of telling Mama he'd had enough. Time to put the lid back on the stink. But the stink never went away. Good St. Louis. In my head, I broke St. Louis into two parts. There was our St. Louis, all tall buildings, dusty patches of grass, mamas sitting outside on inside chairs, kids fighting by the elevators. And then there was the good part where Daddy worked. Big brick houses with their own green yards, tall trees shading the grass, kids on their own bicycles, no sharing bikes like we did with our legs dangling down the handlebars. It was not far from my part of St. Louis to the good part, but everything looked different. I bet there was no grouchy grandma inside any of those houses. No green smell floated out of those kitchens. I bet they just ate sandwiches. Just sandwiches with a green skirt of lettuce. Never any big messy pots with a ham hock floating in it. Daddy managed housekeeping at a hotel in Clayton. He made sure every bed was made up crisp, no wrinkles. He made vacuum tracks deep and diagonal into the red carpet. He kept gold curtains pulled back tight with tassel ties. If the folks in the rooms tipped well, he took me or Marlene out for a ride to the good part of town. We'd stop at a gas station on the way home and he'd buy me a soda. Then he'd let me drink it before we went home so I didn't have to share. On the way home, we passed house after house of red brick with white children playing on the lawns. I asked, "Can we live over there?" I knew Daddy's answer, but I couldn't help that little hope bubble that rose up in me. Sick Marlene. Marlene got sick first, and that was a problem because Marlene won't tell you she's sick. Sick Marlene gets all quiet and hides. She won't walk around whining or rubbing her head or asking for something cool to sip on. By the time you know Marlene is sick, she's about to die. It was right after lunch and Marlene was laying in bed, so I did what I always did. I bothered and bossed her to see if she'd get up. "Marlene, you too big for naps." "I know," Marlene said, but she didn't move. "Marlene, you acting like a big old baby." Normally, Marlene would say, "Shup, Bobby," her shut and up mashing together like a sandwich. But this Marlene just kept laying there, and her thumb was in her mouth. Marlene had taken her thumb out of her mouth 3 years ago because I said no first graders suck their thumbs. So when I saw that thumb plus all that not talking and laying down, I went to tell Mama. Black and sick. If you're black and sick, you have to go to the black hospital. It's called Homer G. Phillips. And if you live far away, you have to ride the bus. Even if you get to the bus stop early, it's still summer in St. Louis, so you will melt while you wait. Mama decided to take Marlene to the doctor. Worry rose up from Mama like a smell. I held her hand while she held on to Marlene. It was blazing, but Marlene had a sweater on. Her shoulders trembled a little with chills. She didn't talk. This was not normal Marlene. It was fever Marlene. She made little whimpering sounds. "Bus will be here soon, baby," Mama said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were afraid. I squeezed her hand. None of us like going to the clinic all the way over to Homer G. Phillips. At the clinic, you gotta wait and wait until they call your name. You start off daydreaming, but you have to wait so long you run out of pleasant thoughts. Then you're just sitting in an uncomfortable chair, surrounded by sick folks and their coughs and trembles, and the adults are always nervous looking because they thought they'd be back at work by now. I always wished Homer G would be a little bit better the next time we came, but it's the same every time. On TV, Doctors make house calls on white girls with their own rooms and long nightgowns. They bring their doctor bags and stethoscopes right up to your bedside. They check you right there, so you never have to ride a slow, hot bus or wait in line. But we didn't have a house doctor. We had Mama. And sometimes her best nursing was not enough. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this excerpt of my work with you. And now I'll turn it back over to Dr. Nam.